What almost feels like another combat evolution is upon us with today's updates. The combat beta updates that have been worked on over the past few months are now released into the live game. Before we get into that, quick announcement, the Oddment store has had a refresh. So you'll notice immediately upon accessing the Oddment store that it does look different. The new system has been broken up into two tabs, the consumables and cosmetics. The first three options at the top of the consumables are static. They will remain the same every single day. However, the bottom three will change every 24 hours. They will range from things like Cinder Cores, Pulse Cores, Silverhawk Down, Dwarven Toolboxes, things like that. And the cosmetics section will feature between 3 and 5 items, which will rotate weekly and update on Wednesdays. This tab will contain cosmetic items from various previous events and sources, including pets and outfits. Also, to celebrate the combat changes with today's update, we have Thok's Smashing Buffs combat event once again live. From today until 23:59 game time on March 11th, you're going to find Thok hanging out at War's Retreat with a bundle of buffs to help in combat. The Overload Cauldrons make a return. Death costs are free, with members respawning at a nearby hub instead of Death's office. Automatic tier 4 luck through the duration of the event. Sign of Life cooldowns reset upon entering bank areas. Combat auras will be immediately reset when their cooldown has ended, and you'll be able to choose your Reaper and Slayer tasks. Reaper points will give double points for this event. Anyways, with today's update, the combat has had a brand new lick of paint, making it more fluid, improving the 3 original combat styles, and bringing it closer in line with Necromancy. There are clearer tooltips, labels, and descriptions to help understand all your abilities, an overhaul to accuracy and the crit system, and overall you'll feel more consistent and control with less RNG, no matter what combat style you take on. Big changes for the damage potential are, they've replaced the roll to hit system with a damage potential system against NPCs, removed the number of hidden buffs that increase your hit chance when using special attacks or ults, reduced the minimum hit chance required to damage an NPC under the new system from 25% down to 1%. Critical strikes were modernized for melee range and magic. Players now have a base 10% crit chance and a base 10% crit damage, which increases with levels up to 50% at level 90. They've adjusted the damage to guarantee critical strike abilities such as Shadow Tendrils and Smoke Tendrils to take into account their extra guaranteed damage. Reduced the adrenaline gain from critical strike buff from Meteor Strike, Incendiary Shot, and Tsunami to account for the player's additional base crit strikes chance, 10% down to 8%. The damage cap has been raised from 10k damage to 30k, removed and replaced several effects from items that affect the hit cap or were affected by the hit cap as they are no longer relevant. Channeled abilities now have a new channel bar component at the top interface, and it's now displayed when using a channel ability. They've removed the channel ability presence from the buff bar. Channel abilities cast out of range will now cause the player to run into range and cast as expected, and fixed a number of issues with Revolution being slow to act after finishing a channeled ability. The action bar has had a ton of improvements, with action bar slots now highlighting briefly with a gold outline when they're interacted with. By default, action bar slots will now show their cooldown with a centered timer. This feature can be moved to the top right of the ability bar slot or toggled on or off via the settings, combat, action bar to action bar. Global cooldown will no longer display the ability cooldown in text form to remove visual clutter. Remove the white flash that occurs at the end of the global cooldown rotation graphic. In the future, they like to add something subtle, but for now, to keep flashing relevant to specific abilities as opposed to having your entire action bar light up, they've gone with this solution. Action bar slots that have no relation to the global cooldown will no longer display it unnecessarily. For example, teleport to War's Retreat. Action bar slots will no longer flash unnecessarily when swapping weapons after having been used in the current play session. They've reduced the size of the keybind information as it was taking up a large amount of real estate when only contextually relevant. Shorten the modifiers like Alt to a lowercase a, Control to lowercase c, and Shift to lowercase s. Hit splats have had a slight change. The delay has been lowered from 1.4 seconds to 1.2 seconds, which means that hit splats will appear more as expected, allowing newer hit splats to always replace older ones if all slots are full. To improve damage clarity, they removed all linked damage rules such as Snapshot, Greater Ricochet, and Snipe with enhanced Nightmare Gauntlets. These ability damages will now interact as expected with various damage buffs. Remove damage per level granted by boosting melee, strength, ranged, and magic stats. Potions will still boost accuracy and damage, however, it will be done via 2 different systems. Ability damage ranges have been balanced to account for the loss of DPL. They remove skewed damage rolling for all abilities such as Dismember, Teleport, Fragmentation Shot, and Combust. This means that the average damage of these abilities is now higher than before. Now, I'm not going to go over every single detail for all the ability changes, but there are a lot. I'll just touch on some of the core changes to the different styles. So for melee, abilities now respect the truer center of NPCs, reworked ability priorities to reduce or remove the idea of hidden attacks where mechanics were not correctly synced up with their animations, modified various hit timings to better match the visuals, rewrote all melee abilities to be easier to adjust and work with. This is a buff to development and allows faster, more efficient changes going forward. And channeled abilities now allow movement while remaining within attack range of the target. And you can see on here, there's a ton of damage buffs to the various different abilities across the board when it comes to melee, as well as timings for the hits and hit splats, not to mention some changes to some popular melee weapons and their special attacks. Range has also seen a similar treatment with the damage abilities being buffed in a plethora of different abilities. Bow of the Last Guardian has been rebalanced with some buff icon changes. Saren Godbow now hits the center of the target, meaning any 5x5 monster will always get hit with all shots. Ruby bolts work differently now, where they increase the damage of an attack by 25 to 125% ability damage based on the target's current HP, and no longer have a cooldown. Again, with magic, ton of abilities have gotten a damage buff, as well as some changes to some of their popular weapon special attacks. Speaking of special attacks, they now display their cooldown and target type in their tooltip, and they updated and narrowed the damage ranges of most special attacks in game. Next, global cooldown abilities, Surge, Dive, and Escape, can always be cast during global cooldown, no longer generating adrenaline, are now classified as abilities rather than basic abilities. Equilibrium has been changed, the aura itself's been redesigned, now increases the player's ability damage by 12%, but prevents player crit from striking. The Equilibrium perk, now renamed Eruptive, increases your ability damage stat by 0.5% per rank. This will now apply at the base level, increasing damage over time, poison, and other effects. PvP damage effectiveness has been decreased for a number of different abilities, so you'll see less damage potential as far as PvP is concerned. Lastly, some miscellaneous changes and bug fixes. They updated Magic's animation priorities, which should lead to more fluid animations and reduce attacks firing while hidden or without animations. Combat dummies have been updated with their max hit mode guaranteeing crit strikes, and updated how the player who modifies the mode is stored so that the dummy remembers who they are if they log out. Combat dummy in War's Retreat will now correctly play a defend/flinch animation with each hit inflicted. Vestments of Havoc increased adrenaline no longer works for non-melee styles. Revolution no longer delays the player after casting channel abilities such as Greater Concentrated Blast. Fixed the issue with Guthic's Blessing and the Brief Respite Invention perk where the maths were being calculated incorrectly. All targets affected by Greater Chain will now benefit from the additional hits granted by Rack and Ruin's secondary Combust extension buff. Auto attack damage range increased from 0 to 100% to 20 to 100%. Mobile perk, Shadow's Grace, no longer causes Barge or Greater Barge or Bladed Dive to generate half adrenaline. Blood Tendrils has now cleaned up the self-damage with how it's calculated. Hits added through the Spear of Annihilation now get appended to the end of the ability instead of placing them in front of the double damage initial hits. Greater Barge and Barge no longer forces channeled abilities to attack every 4 cycles and instead uses the same rate the ability would naturally do, and now uses the correct Barge animation rather than kick. Berserk has been updated to be multiplicative as opposed to additive. Flurry now deals full damage in both single target and multi-target. Assault had animations updated to better match the ability and hit timings. Magma Tempest target variant now applies an auto attack delay when cast to match standard ability casts. Rack and Ruin Combust extension effect is now stack based, benefiting from abilities such as Greater Chain that cause it to hit multiple enemies. Metamorphosis has had its damage bonus increased from 62% to 66%, in PvP 31% to 33%, and Greater Dazing Shot has had its hit chance debuff now active for a full 4.2 seconds and not cleared on attack. The hit chance debuff is now reapplied when the ability is used. Previously it wouldn't, which means it could time out. And lastly, they increased the base hit chance of a lot of quest bosses to use the standard base hit chances implemented with today's update. Anyways, if you enjoyed this video so far, please hit that like button. If you're not subscribed yet and you want to stay up to date on all things RuneScape related, then hit that subscribe button. Thank you. Lastly, I will close out with some brief patch notes that have been changed with today's update. So starting off with Necromancy, they reduced the rate at which moonstones appear in Thalmung's store, increased the drop rate of moonstones from rituals and from ghostly implings. Thalmung now sells impure essence in its noted form. For quest refinement, they reinstated Betty's hand in the sand dialogue option when the quest is completed so she can sell additional pink dye. And lastly, they fixed an issue that was causing Doloria's gloves to make player characters' head fully or partially invisible depending on the worn head armor or cosmetic override. Anyways, that's it for your patch notes. Links to everything discussed in this video down in the description below. Head on over there and check them out if you wish to do so. If you missed last week's video, it'll be on screen now, so I'll see you there, and if not, I'll see you at the next RuneScape update here on the channel. Until then, I am out. Aloha.